This document here is the estimate. A couple things to note in the estimate. We are carrying a 10% design contingency, which is normal for this stage of the project. Design contingency is something that, as the drawings get developed, things that were missed in the estimate get pulled out of design contingency. This is a normal thing, and those of you that are working on the Wildwood, you'll have a 10% on your schematic design when you submit to MSBA. We're also carrying a 7% on top of that, a 7% escalation factor. This will go to construction in probably around September, maybe August, but most likely September.
Is that a normal percent? Seems a little high, 7%, especially where we're
Oh,
living.
there's no question that it's high, but we're reflecting the times that unfortunately we're living in right now. Construction has gone up between 30 and 40% in the last 12 to 14 months. That's 30 to 40%. So, and these numbers reflect that. So, you know, numbers that were kicked around even when we started this project have gone up significantly, and not as much as the 30 or 40% that we're seeing in the bid climate. But we're quite confident that the project as is right now has everything in it with the exception of the generator. You know, it has the stone water table, it has everything that we talked about on the interior. It has the pickleball courts, it has the bocce courts, the pergola, and things of that nature. So you can see all that detail in this estimate. You know, when we first got the estimate, it was actually higher. We did do some reconciling over the past few days and got the estimate to where we're comfortable with the scope of work as defined it is. I then took the estimate, I plugged it into my budget, estimated what the OPM fee would be, estimated what the designer fee would be, estimated what the furniture costs would be, what the utility back charge possibly could be, which we won't know till we're in construction. Things of that nature that normally pop up, I put in the blue section in the budget.
And when you talk about the OPM and the designer, that is up and beyond what we've done as far as our schematic design.
Correct. So, and I did a little math at the bottom of the budget and you know, representing the balance of what you have in the study that you appropriated and deducted that from what would need to be raised, appropriated, and or borrowed. If you didn't change anything and you said, hey, everything looks great, let's just move on. So that's where we are. So in plain English, without looking at all the data, we did put together a quick slideshow. So do you want to run the slideshow there, Lee?
Unless you guys have any questions.
Well, no, this is basically, this estimate is everything that we put together. All these meetings that we've come to, this includes our site lighting, this will be the pickleball courts, this is the roofing, this is everything that we've done.
Which you agreed to.
Correct.
No
Okay.
cuts.
No cuts.
No value engineering.
But I do
As
see
is.
things like the BDA, the bi-directional antenna, that the fire, and that's not included in here. The emergency generator is not included.
So with those, normally what we would do, we're carrying a 5% construction contingency in the budget, which is common for a new project. We'll probably use 2 to 3%. The balance of that would go to things like that. We don't know if we need a bi-directional amplifier, and that's a local option after we do a test. And if the building is not a metal building, it's a wood building, so it might fare far better than a steel building would.
Plus, it's a
with regard
single
to
story.
a BDA. A BDA is basically a repeater for emergency signals. So when the firefighters come in the building, we want to make sure that their radios work. So, and if they don't work, we install what's called a bidirectional amplifier. In the 9th edition of the building code, that was added as a requirement that you test for it. It used to be pretty rare, but now that we're testing for it, they're more and more.
One more thing, Dan, the design and pricing contingency, I know you said is that 10%?
Yes.
But then you said there's a construction contingency?
Yeah,
which
on
is-
my budget, I put a 5% construction contingency on top of that. So the design contingency is related purely to the contract documents. The
Okay,
construction contingency is related solely to construction. So 22% of the total budget is inflation and contingencies at this point in time.
all right, for unforeseen or something that we
Correct.
can precedent, that we're not
Correct.
going back for more money after the fact.
Right. We're not, we'll never go back.
Okay.
We live within what's voted.
Judge, so on this blue sheet, on this other sheet here, what I see here, total cost, balance of study.
Yep.
Is that what we have left over from the first phase?
That's correct.
Okay. And so that gets subtracted then?
That would get subtracted because you can use that for the design of the next
We
phase.
can use the rest
With
of
it-
that.
with the language is written such that we can use that,
Okay.
in my opinion.
Great, okay. thanks.
Okay?
Could I ask,
Go ahead.
please? So on your total of all construction coming out to 14.8,
Yep.
and then how do we reconcile that to the 16.3,
So, on top of the
or the
14,
17.2, excuse me?
Is that gonna be in the presentation?
Yeah, it's kind of the last slide.
it's kind of the last slide, but I can give it to you in a nutshell. The 14.8 is construction.
Okay. And
You
that
still gotta
doesn't
pay the
include-
designer to draw it. You gotta pay the OPM to monitor it.
Right,
You gotta pay the testing agency to test. You gotta pay the geotech to witness the foundations. You gotta pay mitigation to the electric company for providing service. You gotta pay for furniture. You know, so all of those are added in to that bottom line number.
okay,
That's why I've never wanted to say, okay, it's gonna be a $14 million construction, because then 14 million stuck in everyone's head. There's more to it than just construction,
okay, thank you.
okay?
Sometimes these are referred to as hard costs and soft costs. And the
Okay.
hard costs
That I
are
understand.
building and site, the soft costs are what Dan was talking about, plus some other things potentially.
I also put in there commissioning. When you do your school, commissioning is paid for by the school building authority, which is one of the best services the school building authority does. But on all other projects, it's not. So we can decide whether we want to do commissioning or not. You do have a fairly good maintenance department here. And I'm not just saying that because George is the chairman of the committee. I'm saying that because we go to towns that don't have maintenance and we demand commissioning. So commissioning is something that is optional. So those type of things we can walk through. This, I think, is the worst case scenario. And what you decide between now and the next few weeks will determine where that number goes.
How are you trying to work your way up there?
You know what I mean? I didn't want to sound like a total sucker, George. I had to throw a little in there. So, fire away.
Thank you, Dan. On the presentation up here, which will be available to the public when we're done, we've highlighted, well, I'll just show you the agenda. We're gonna talk about a few things tonight. We're gonna talk about what the construction estimate actually is, basic overview of it. We're gonna talk a little bit more about design contingency. We went past that pretty fast, and there's already some questions about design contingency versus construction contingency. It's worth reviewing, because it's very important. We're gonna talk about some of the item breakdowns, because as Dan said, this is what was put in the drawings. There's a little tiny asterisk after that. We did actually make some adjustments based on the feedback we got from the estimator, and we wanna run those past you tonight. There's some small quantity adjustments. It has mostly to do with the landscape, and that's not because John Hammer's not here, the landscape architect. It's because we felt like we needed to do that in fairness to come to you tonight, to get closer. As you can see, this is the first version of the cost estimate with all the marks and comments and analysis, and Alma and I have been working with our cost estimator this week to check quantities, to check locations, check wall types, to make sure things were in, that were out. It's not all deducts. We actually added some things in that we missed, I'll be honest. That's just part of the process, and we wanted to make sure we had a good estimate for you. So that's what you've got is the corrected version. And we want to thank Colin from PM&C for jumping on this the last second, helping us out today. So that's that. And then we actually, Dan, we're going to surprise you a little bit. We have some potential value engineering items that we want to float today because this number is higher than you were probably expecting, and we feel it's our responsibility, and we said we're going to do this in the interview to get the job, that we would help you get on budget. So we want to float some ideas to begin with. I'll speak more about those in a second. And then Dan's thing is the overall project cost review at the end. So what is a cost estimate? It's based on the schematic design drawings that we provided. It's based on the design narratives that elaborate on the schematic design drawings. This was a few meetings ago when you guys said what's in, what's out. And it's also based on the geotechnical investigations that happened since we last met and we got the results back from. So the design for the stormwater controls for the parking lot area are in response to the geotechnical investigations that happened and reflect what is feasible on the site. And then construction cost estimates includes construction costs, only hard costs. So the design contingency is at 10% at the end of SD, at the end of schematic design. That's typical, that's expected, and it's responsible. We do this because we're only at the end of schematics. We still have design development where we coordinate the systems and elaborate on them, and then construction documents where we document the systems in great detail so that they can be priced and constructed. Because there's a lot of information yet to explore, we use this design contingency to cover things like additional detail and further development, design accommodations that result from actually meshing the systems together. Not everything can work in an ideal situation, they all have to get along. And then finally, developments we just haven't designed yet. There's some things we haven't done that we still need to do, and that's a natural part of the process. As time goes on, we become more specific, and this covers, it hopes to cover the specificity moving forward.
In this exact methodology, you'll see again when we get to the town hall, and you'll see again when you guys do the Wildwood School. So there's nothing here that's out of the ordinary from a standard, standards. When you did the high school, you probably had a meeting with these exact numbers. If you go to the Wayback Machine.
You'll notice next time we get together, and I really do hope we get together again to talk about a DD cost estimate in a few months, you'll see the design contingency will start to shrink. And that's on purpose because we know more, and so we don't need quite as much for contingency. And then when we get toward the end of construction documents, it'll shrink again to only a few percent. And that's because at that point, you know pretty much as you're going to know before you go to bid. And so that money gets just put back into the budget. Does that make sense? So, the cost breakdown. This is the cover sheet. It's up here. It's a lot of numbers. I'm not going to go through all of them right now because it's a lot, but it's here for in the interest of transparency. And we're all looking at the bottom right corner, which is 14.8 million. But this describes how you get from the hard costs of the new building and site work. Let me see if this laser's going to work. Nope. How you get from the new building and the site work, which is subtotaled at 11 million, down to 14, with all of the other requirements that are necessary to build the building. And then from there, Dan takes over with his larger spreadsheet and talks about all the other soft costs beyond that. So that's the general gist of it. As a part of the budget, we can include alternates. Alternates can be either additions or deductions, subtractions. Right now, the first two we've already talked about, the bidirectional amplification or the DAS system. That's a potential add of $47,000 and change. Also the emergency generator, which is currently sized for 100 kilowatts, which is at $180,000. And so we'll test out, is that the right size generator moving forward? Should we get a bigger one or a smaller one? What exactly goes on it? All that kind of stuff. But this is a way to put these ads in. If you remember a few meetings ago, when we talked about exterior materials, we said we could make the windows out of a number of different products. And we had this long discussion of whether if it's PVC, is it better acoustics and cost and durability and all those kinds of things. Because we have 3 very similar window types, we asked the cost estimator to price all 3 types. So UPVC windows, which are kind of the new generation PVC, are $77,000 cheaper than the aluminum windows that we have in the drawings. And these are thermally isolated, high-performance aluminum windows. These are not, the sliders from the 1970s that have condensation all over them. These are the high-quality windows you have in your high school. And then we also asked them to price up fiberglass windows because we've used those on occasion. Those weren't as much of a deduction as we expected. It was only about a $33,000 reduction. So it's one or the other. You could save some money there. And then at a last-minute ditch, we wanted to really figure out if we were looking at the site as a whole, what else could we kind of capture as a single potential deduct? And the pergola by the bocce courts was a potential deduct that we could just put a price on. It's not foregone, it's just for discussion. None of these things are foregone. That's what we're here for tonight. So for you in the audience, this might be a little small, so I'll speak about it in general. We wanted to point out some things that were in the cost estimate that we moved around. And one is the built-in cubicles in the office space. We had shown cubicles in the open office space graphically as workstations. They priced them as built-in, as in woodwork. And we said, you know what? We'll probably get better bang for our buck if we get office furniture, modular furniture. And so we moved that to FF&E, or fixtures, furniture, and equipment. So that moves to the furniture budget where I think, Terry, we had kind of talked about that anyway. But this was just a reminder to say, you have $4,000 that's set aside in a different budget and won't go into the hard costs of the building. Another one we pointed out is we have a couple of counter doors. One separates the kitchen from the dining room, and it's the one right above the highlight. It's about $6,000 for that door alone.
I'm sorry, which door was that?
It separates the kitchen from the multi-purpose room. The big, huge counter has a roll-down door grill around it, so you can separate the two. There's also one at the front desk, and that's just part of securing the admin suite from the lobby. We put this in at about $6,000 again to represent how much that could cost, but there are other ways to solve this problem. So that might be a small cost that can come out. We're just pointing out some things of specificity that happened during the cost estimating process. So we had our engineers look at the plumbing, mechanical, and electrical systems and their budgets as they were described in the cost estimate, and we made some tweaks, actually. Fire protection, we moved a little bit on the price. They did a little additional checking. We also checked on the HVAC numbers, on complexity of the systems, and that moved a little bit, and now we're at a place where the engineers feel comfortable with the prices that are represented. And this is a combination of industry standards as well as cost per square foot for the installation of all of the parts and pieces. So we got the thumbs up from engineers, so that's always good. Here's the thing I said had the little asterisk on it. In the planting plan, we showed a lot of shrubs and plants and ground cover. It looks really nice in plan, and it could look spectacular on day one with everything installed. But we realized there was a big price tag associated with it. It was, both of these numbers for both trees and shrubs were almost double. And we said, this doesn't really work with our budget. We need to get back to something that's more responsible. And so we went from about 54 trees down to 34 trees. And then we took the 10,000 square feet of plantings down to 5,000 square feet of plantings. And we can show you what that looks like in plan briefly, but there's a lot of trees on this plan, which is great, but they're not free. So we wanted to reveal that to you right now, and we'll work with the landscape architect. Any questions thus far?
I have a question. So when you're talking, especially about that planting issue there, are we talking about like the buffer zone?
No, that's a really good question. The reduction of the overall trees that we're buying will be in a way to protect all of the things we said we were going to do. In other words, the buffer trees stay. The plantings throughout the parking area that are required by zoning to break up the parking area, those will stay as necessary. There might just be fewer of them, so a little less frequent.
And the type of plants that you're putting in, are these going to almost be like maintenance-free, something? Or
Well, that's one of the reasons why we took a look at landscaping, because I can't tell you how many projects get built, and you go back 2 years later, and they haven't mulched, and they haven't taken care of the ground cover, and they haven't taken care of the shrubs, and we don't wanna create it's one of the things you've all said is you wanna try and make it as maintenance-free as possible. But we are required, with minimal plantings per your zoning bylaw, which is law, and we will conform with that. And we did say we'd be good neighbors to the neighbors to the south to make sure that we had a good, arborvitae screen there. But we had originally in here trees that were, some elms and things like that, just too cost prohibitive.
This is the first time the landscape has been priced out, and so it's pretty common to put in the best design you can come up with and then look at what you have. It's unfortunately a bit of a subtractive game when it comes to landscape design. As I'm being completely frank with you, we don't like it this way, but landscape's expensive, and there's a balance between maintenance and installation cost, and we want to find the right balance. So we're going to take the design concept and work with it.
So would some of those things in landscape design be like, maybe instead of bringing in turf, that maybe you're just gonna spray it, things like that, to try to cut some of the costs?
Actually, we did do that already. You'll see under the site improvements at the end, there's a line for loam and seed rather than turf to save a lot of money.
We're already at loam and seed.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, all right.
So that's $1.50 a foot rather than quite a lot more.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to preface this section by saying we don't want to necessarily take any of these things out any more than the rest of you. However, we said we'd play fair and help you get to the budget the best way we could. So we've identified some things that are easier to change because they're not involved, they're not intrinsic to the design, if you know what I mean. Some things that are somewhat less painful to change them, to save them. All right, so don't get mad at me just yet. Here we go. First thing is the fieldstone base. There's a lot of money associated with the fieldstone base. There's a lot of aesthetic and impression and culture associated with this. It's kind of part of the identity of the architecture of the region, but it's not free. It's rather expensive, and it can be replaced with a much lower cost durable material and maintain the great majority of the intent of the architecture. I'm also, what we did when we put this together today was we took chunks, actually Alma took chunks of the budget that you have in front of you, and we took the snapshots and put them on the slide with a red box around them. This is not new math, these are not projected savings, these are zoomed in sections of the cost estimate. I want to be clear about that because when you do value engineering, it's not just called cost cutting, it's called value engineering, which doesn't really involve engineering and maybe not value, but in any case, it's because when you take the fieldstone base off of the building, for example, you have to put something back. And so there's always a little bit of a trade. It's not just, we're not just going to take $170,000 credit and move on with life. That means the first 2 feet of the building wouldn't have anything on it, and we can't do that. So,
So when it comes to that, the fieldstone, is there a way, also with the cost of saying not the entire building, but accenting the front with fieldstone, that kind of thing of being worked out?
Absolutely. In fact, we had not completely calculated where it goes full height at the entry, and we added that back in to have a fair representation so that we could look at this number and say, okay, maybe it only goes around the entry and nowhere else, or maybe we come down at the entry. Yeah, it absolutely an adjustment.
But can I ask another question? So does that mean, I remember in one of our discussions, Dan, you were saying sometimes with the masonry, that piece is just such an expensive cost. Does that mean masonry would have to do that small area, which would that really be helping the cost if they actually have to come in?
Well, you can get the same water table with a different material, just not masonry. I mean, if we changed it to brick, the savings would not be huge. If we changed it to, a different colored hardy material, the savings would be greater, far greater. So, I mean, these are things that he's identifying. I haven't seen this list either, but they're almost, I'm guaranteeing you they're identical to what's in my head too.
So these costs that you're talking about here, are these strictly the cost for the product itself, or does it include the labor to install it?
Labor and product.
I knew you'd have good questions, Jeff, because your head's definitely into these things. And that's why I started with we don't have a replacement material necessarily. So this is just a zoom in of the actual estimate without the full value engineering exercise done. So we're not gonna be able to take the full value of these, but it's we're looking at the target of masonry.
If we eliminate masonry on the building or get the masonry lower, I'd love to eliminate the fine sub-bid mason. Trust me when I tell you, because there's just not enough of them. And you just don't get the value.
We can come back and look at these. We only have a half dozen, so we can come back. Just in case you forgot what the building looked like, a little illustration. Yes, we can begin to push and pull where the masonry starts and stops. Maybe it doesn't go all the way up at the entry. It's right now a unit cost of $75 a square foot, plus some other things. So, yeah, we can play around with it.
Is that estimate, so that goes around the entire building, 2
Yeah.
feet?
Yeah, it does, and then up all the way at the entry. And the idea there is to protect the hardy panel from the ground so it doesn't get wet and so it doesn't get stained or banged up with a snow blower or hit with a weed whacker. Something really durable that weathers well, that reduces your maintenance.
So it's not just aesthetics,
No.
it serves a purpose.
Absolutely.
Okay, good to know.
And Lee, I know we discussed this before, but I see you have a standing seam roof here throughout it. Is that just for this picture purpose, or?
You're absolutely right. I grabbed the wrong image. That's correct. The standing seam roof only happens above the entry and on the porches. The big roofs are all asphalt shingle.
Okay.
I knew I shouldn't have switched out that photo. All right.
Good catch though.
Yeah, good catch. The next value engineering idea. By the way, roofs are not going to be on the value engineering list because we've already value engineered them down to asphalt and standing seam by the design, and we feel they're in a good place. So, not a huge value left to get there. So I'm trying to get big stuff as much as possible. The patio size. We have a huge patio, which was kind of the point of the design when we started out. But how big is big enough, and how big should it be? We have a design, but it needs to be developed more. And right now we're looking at 10,000 square feet of patio. It's all concrete, that's stamped so it's like fieldstone or flagstone or whatever, and also colored. So it's not gonna look like a sidewalk, it's gonna look like a patio. That comes at a cost. So one step is we could, instead of stamping it and coloring it, it could just be regular old sidewalk white color, and it could just be a brushed finish. Scored so it doesn't crack too much, but it would just look like kind of regular concrete patio. That's a $5 a square foot savings. When you multiply that out times 10,000 square feet, it makes a big difference. The other thing we can do is just simply reduce how much concrete we place, how much we put down. That makes a big difference as well. So right sizing the patio, and also I'll go to the next slide because I'll explain. The patio next to the building is zone 1. And the patio around the bocce court and the pergola and around all these planters, which are the dashed rectangles, are zone 2.
Excuse me, do you have a pointer? Does someone have the pointer
The
there?
point is not
Not working?
It's
This is zone 1,
Okay,
Doesn't
this
work
is
with
zone 2.
screen.
okay, okay.
we brought the pointer, it's just not working.
I can't believe
The
it.
pointer works, but it's not working on the
It's
screen.
not working on the screen.
I'll be
You
the
did a
pointer.
great job.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have a human pointer.
Good,
Lee, can
good.
I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Now that we're talking about the stamping, which I'm very familiar with, but as far as the surface, especially for elderly to be walking on, with the brushed concrete, I mean, even though it's not aesthetically as pleasing as the stamp, that's a smoother surface compared to the stamped. So I'm just thinking of people walking on it, their balance,
Yeah.
things that are happening. So-
No, that's an excellent point. What we would do is, let's say we were going to stamp it to look like something. We would pick a pattern that would have a relatively low profile, that would provide good traction, and wouldn't be highly textured to avoid those kind of tripping hazards or just traction hazards. We'd come up with something that would be as safe of surface as we could come up with. A brushed finish like sidewalks are fantastic. So there's a pro to it too.
Right.
Because I'm thinking about people with, you know,
Walkers.
walkers,
Yeah.
the walkers, especially the wheel walkers and everything. We don't want them like
Oh, yeah.
as if they were walking over stone or whatever.
But which also leads into the fact of, when you're breaking it up in zones,
Yeah.
are you saying, you know, taking away the thought of making it smaller in those zones, or is the zones just how far, what considers a zone?
Well, the first curvy line, there's actually 2 colors. That's really where the zones come from. And the idea is the zone next to the building is one color, and that's where the seating and tables and, you know, chairs and benches and you know, umbrellas and that kind of stuff happen. And then the next zone is really meant to support the planting areas, those raised planters. That concrete pad is there to put the planters on, to make it fully accessible so that anyone, walker, wheelchair, whatever, can make it around that on sure footing and participate in the garden activities that are there, or go all the way up to the pergola and bocce courts. So it's a fully accessible, universally accessible environment. If we don't pour concrete as a patio around those planters, accessibility becomes a bit more of a challenge, as you can imagine. And so we didn't want to say, well, we'll keep the planters and lose the patio because the patio is expensive. The slide we were just talking about here also talks about removing potentially removing some of the planters as well. So if you made the planting area smaller, maybe we only kept the north chunk, the part that's upstream from the pergola. Remove some of the planters on the downstream side. That would be a way to reduce that scale, reduce the planters and the concrete. And then maybe we change the shape of the patio to make it a little smaller, but just as usable. These are all things we can investigate in design development, and right now we're just looking at ideas to try to scale back an item that is pretty self-contained as far as the estimate's concerned.
The raised gardens and the pergola are both things that can be done by Shawshene, Tech. You know, these are things that, you know, can always be added. I'm looking at Diane's face, it's not good. But these are things that, you know, we can put in, you know, the footings for them, and, you know, it can become a school project or a Boy Scout project or something like that.
Oh, you gotta.
I'm not so concerned about losing the basic planners. I think this is an opportunity at some point for businesses in the community to make a donation. Maybe even give them a naming right for a planter, and we can make it up that way. So that doesn't really concern me at all. We have the space for it, we can do it, and like you said, we can add them in later on. But I think there's plenty of businesses in town who would step up and know that we're cost conscious about this.
So, a question is, are the planters on top of the patio?
Yeah.
Or, yeah,
Yes.
versus you see these raised planters on the
Right.
the grass? Okay, and what you're talking about, what you happened to mention then, was if that was a problem getting to it, I always feel that, you know, when you add on to an existing concrete thing,
Yeah.
it doesn't always quite work out, the addition, you know? There's either
Well,
a
I mean,
gap or something there, but,
I can
I would
say,
agree with Paul as far as the
Could
number of
always
planters.
prepare for
and they
that.
have to be raised, so that, you know,
Yeah, they-
the seniors that are in wheelchairs can garden.
Can't get
You
right.
know, we want them
No,
to
I
be
like
able to
that
wheel
idea.
right up and garden.
I wouldn't be in favor of reducing the concrete at all,
No,
for the reasons that Diane.
Well, you could do the
Just
concrete to it, have the footings, everything in
Right.
place. So you have all the concrete that you need, everything's there, and just have the footings there.
Right.
So they could be built after the fact.
That sounds reasonable.
Say a local rotary or something wants to
Right.
donate.
Right, we could forego the stamping, we could forego the coloring.
But I
And
mean,
you, and you,
when
you
you're
know-
talking millions, I don't wanna just turn ahead because these are nickels, you know, I just wanna, before we start cutting things out, like these windows we were talking about, we were talking about long-term, something that's going to fit the building,
right,
so.
right.
I don't wanna dissect this project that way.
the other thing too is, you know, the planters, the pergola, they come at the end of the project.
Right.
And it's gonna take 12, 14 months to build the project. And that gives plenty of time for fundraising, and once people see the porta potty get delivered and the fence go up, they know it's real. And generally with these, the fundraising starts flowing in when they know it's really gonna happen.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we could sell bricks, we could have a memorial walk,
Oh, that's a
you
great
know, we
idea.
could do all kinds of things.
Alright. This is great conversation. I'm gonna keep going because it's gonna get more awkward.
Oh, I knew this was coming up.
So, the pickleball courts are an investment. We talked about this from the beginning. When we put 2 on the plan, we said, how's this look? And you all said, this is great, let's do 2 more. And we said, okay, we'll get it priced up. We said, should we put 6? You said, no, 4 is good. So here we are, we have 4. This is the cost of 4. They're in the right place in the plan. They're great design, they're very durable, the
Can you
details
say
are
the
fantastic.
price? I can't see
I
that.
can't see.
The price is 216,000.
For just the courts, and then it's it's another 75,000 for the fence around.
And the lighting, also illumination.
In the site lighting numbers, yeah.
And that's for 4.
The site lighting's not gonna go down that much if you have 2 or 4. You still bring the circuit out. You
Right.
might lose a head.
So, something to think about, it's, you know, it's almost $300,000 for that component alone. So, like George was saying, we're looking for the biggest item we can look for.
Diane will have none of that. I can see the look on your face.
I didn't say I was gonna have popular reception from this. All right,
I mean, the 3 here are going constantly, but, go ahead, I'm listening.
Diane's trying out for the Olympic pickleball team, as you
I
know.
know, it's real. All right, now for the bocce court and the pergola. Dan already gave me some rough for this earlier today, but the bocce court and pergola stand on their own, as you can see from the previous illustration, out at the edge of the landscaping. And so in that way, they're very easy to say, what's the cost of this? Can we do it now, or do we want to do a capital, you know, fundraising campaign and do it in 5 years? It kind of depends on how passionately you all feel about those particular elements. So yeah.
I did tell him that as an Italian, I took offense to picking up logicals. Just saying.
And I also said that would be easy compared to the pickleball discussion.
Yeah.
Could you repeat those numbers?
Yeah, I can't see those
Yeah.
numbers.
38,250 for the pergola and 19,125 for the bocce court.
So you'll get a copy of this digitally.
Oh, good.
There's a cheat code. On the left side of the slide, you can see
Line
there are
numbers.
little
Can't
tiny
see that
numbers.
either.
Yeah.
There are little tiny numbers. Those
Okay.
little tiny numbers are the line items that are associated with the cost estimate. So it
Oh.
says 82, 83, 84.
You can easily find it.
Every single line is numbered without repeats. And that's how you find your way down.
There we go.
All right, so what is the number of the bocce court?
The bocce court is 84.
How's the
On the
one
last
says-
page,
that's not
83,
right.
84.
second to last.
Come on.
Is
No,
that it?
not to last, that's a lot, not second to last.
No,
I have
okay, I,
84 as structural roof.
I'm sorry, I was not right about that last statement. They are repeated. The numbers start over on page 19. I am sorry, I don't know why.
Well, you're gonna send this presentation to me so I can get it out to the rest of the committee, so I'm sure you'll make those.
This is under site improvements.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there is a little detail to the detail. I mean, you really have to look in the detail. And everything is organized
Is
by,
everything in the detail?
everything's-
It's voted in.
everything is organized by CSI, which is Construction Specification Institute numbers.
Mhm.
So for us, we're whizzing through this stuff. You guys, it'll take a little bit longer, but, you know, Division 3 is concrete, Division 4 is masonry, Division, 6 and 7 and 8. 6 is carpentry,
With the plastic, yeah.
woods and plastics, and 5 is metals, steel, things of that nature. 32 is earthwork. So.
You're batting 1,000, I love it.
Alright. It's a lot easier when there was only 16.
I like doing
We doubled
this.
it about 5 years ago.
George, I have a
Yeah.
question. Could you just go back to the reduction there? Okay, so the first one means that instead of 4 pickleball courts, to do 2. Is that correct?
There's
That's-
nothing that means that here. What I'm saying is we currently show 4, and we're suggesting that one way to reduce cost would simply do 2.
All right,
That doesn't mean you're gonna have the cost.
no, I realize that. I'm trying to visualize when we build 3 here.
Yeah.
When we build 3 on this particular piece of property, I believe the town, it cost the town about 83,000. And some of the work was done by the town. A lot of the work was done by the town.
Yeah.
What part did we need outside help with? Was that the leveling the surface
I'm
and the
sure
paving?
finishing and lining.
Yeah, I think all the lining, so in that case, 40,000, as I recall, came from the rec revolving account, and then the other amount was appropriated at the town meeting.
Right, and I know it was around 83,000 or whatever that
Yeah,
was
80 to
voted,
83, right.
something like that. No, I was just trying to compare 3 versus 4, and then the deduction, I thought that number was a little bit high.
Yeah, that was a few years ago.
That was
now.
a few years
Yeah,
ago.
but, yeah, so that was,
What is the surface of the pickleball courts here? Is it asphalt?
asphalt, yeah.
So one thing I want to point out is the construction techniques that are used for these are very, very different. These are concrete slabs that are then post-tensioned, meaning they're structural slabs, so they're not going to move or heave around. They shouldn't crack very much more than anything else that's made of concrete. It's not, asphalt's very flexible. These are not going to be flexible. These are made to be durable for the very long term. There's large foundations for each side of the net stanchion to sit in. And the perimeter fence is full height fence with gates, also in concrete foundations. So these are made to last the long term and are made very differently than what you might build for yourself.
Will they be pitched in such a way that there will be no standing water or puddles?
That would be the anticipation, yes. They'd have a slight crown to them so that, not so much that it would interfere with gameplay, but it would allow them to shed water.
Is that what they are doing with the professional ones today? Building
Concrete?
them concrete?
Probably, yes.
Well,
I'm not a pickleball expert. I don't know if they do clay court and grass turf.
okay.
Depends on the country you're in.
'Cause most I've seen
And like I said, these are all suggestions,
Just
we're
as-
just going through, so
Yeah. Okay.
we'll walk you back from the ledge on that.
I had a feeling though that the question would come up because of the discussions about the
Right.
pickleball courts here on the site. So I did want to point out that there's a pretty
Difference.
substantial difference between the construction details here. And we can step back from these construction details from a post-tension concrete slab, a structural slab. We can come back to just a floating concrete slab, which is a little less expensive, not quite as durable, but a heck of a lot more durable than an asphalt concrete slab. So there's good, better, best to all of these things.
And the upkeep then, as far as resurfacing or redoing them, so what you're saying is you get a lot longer lifetime out of them rather than maybe whatever the lifetime is out of the asphalt ones.
As far as the resurfacing and coating, the court coating itself is customized to its substrate, whether it's asphalt or concrete, and that, being a very durable substrate, it would hold well, but I can't speak specifically to the length of lifespan for the coating.
Question in the back?
I just had a question about the difference between asphalt and concrete. It seems to me that if you happen to fall, asphalt doesn't damage your body as much as concrete does.
They both hurt pretty bad. In my personal experience falling on both materials. When I say flexible for the asphalt, it's flexible to the frost, for example. Or if a tree root were to grow, we don't want that to happen, but if a tree root were to grow, you've seen the asphalt kind of bulge, whereas concrete will just heave. So it's
But
flexible.
I would rather fall on asphalt than on concrete. I mean, having fallen on both.
Yeah, I have.
Just something we're taking into consideration.
So, just as a recap, the items that we had were stone base, the size of the planters and the concrete at the patio, the pickleball courts, the bocce courts, and the pergola, and that's it. These are first blush kind of ideas. This process is a process where the more ideas, the better, and there's not a dumb idea, and we'll talk through any ways to be responsible with the funds that are available to us.
Judge, the pergola, that is what you're considering over the bocce courts, correct?
Yep.
To the side of the bocce courts.
We talked about a gazebo or a pavilion.
Right,
This
right.
is the pergola right now. It's just a sunshade essentially.
Yeah,
We had talked maybe it has a solid roof, maybe not. The price in here for was it 38,000 I think for the pergola is there it is. That's just the wood pergola. The one that could have like vines, wisteria, that kind of stuff. We talked about potentially planting those later.
so maybe I'm gonna ask Terry this question, but like this summer, when you had the concert, if you would have a concert outside and everything, what would you do? Rent a tent, probably about that area off the patio, or do you think that the tent may be placed over the patio for the seating?
Actually, I haven't really even thought of a tent. I was just hoping to be able to, to be outside with the way that overhang. I forget how many feet that overhang comes out.
At least 8, I think.
So nestling something underneath that, and then, so I really haven't thought of a tent per se, because I didn't want to take away from actually what we have there, but, Diane asked a good question in the sense of, I don't see dimension, I can't see, is there dimensions as to how far that comes out?
No.
The concrete itself?
No.
Okay. But I'm not, I really
There's
can't
no
really answer
dimension, but from here to here is 82 feet, so if you swing that down, it's probably about to here.
It's half the distance there, so we say 82, so that
Yeah.
41.
No, it's 82 from the center to the edge of there, if you just swung that around.
Because at one point, if I remember correctly, it wasn't really a tent that was being discussed, it was those corner,
Yeah,
Shades.
what are those
the
called?
sail loft.
Shade sails.
Yeah,
Sunshades and
yeah.
stuff.
So that it wouldn't take away, it would keep the same type of design that was
Yeah.
happening, and it wouldn't take away from it.
Because you would have to secure a tent onto
Yeah.
the patio,
Yeah.
which could create more of a
Yeah, they
tripping
come in with
hazard,
barrels.
that type of
Yeah.
Right
thing.
now, they fill with either water or
Yes.
sand.
We did have a couple shade sales, which is what those are called. In the budget originally, it was about $20,000 as a line item. But because we were so far over budget coming into tonight, we did pull those because they weren't integral to the design as it stands right now. If that jeopardizes the usefulness of the patio, then they should go back in.
So we tried to look at things that don't affect program. So everything we talked about tonight does not affect the program with the exception of the reduction in pickleball. So all your programming spaces stay the same, the building size stays the same. We're not affecting the actual services to the seniors with what we're suggesting.
And again, this is cost estimate, this is an actual bid, so,
No,
yeah.
So just to be clear, in terms of the, when this goes out to bid, the pricing that you have here contemplates that over the next 12 months, costs are gonna continue to rise, and
It's
that's
in there.
factored in.
yes,
That's the 7% escalation.
that's a 7%
To
escalation.
the,
Okay.
is it midpoint of construction?
Yep. 7%.
Are we keeping a list of the things that we removed?
So,
And we haven't really removed anything yet, this is just value
Well,
changes.
they removed the sale,
Yeah, we
That-
removed the sale and a little bit of the landscaping in the number that you have before you tonight.
I just wanna make sure that as we move along, that we keep that in the back of our mind, the things that we've taken out.
Okay.
Because at some point, we may say, that's fine, we can address that later. Or we may say, yeah, we really need to keep that in there and put it back in.
that's true, we could have come to this meeting, with all of the landscaping intact and the shade sail in there and offered them up in the list that we just did. And you know what, perhaps we should have, that would have been a little bit more forthcoming. Because everything else, we actually added some things in to make sure they were accommodated, like cycle benches, we forgot to draw benches, so we added some benches in.
Well, the only reason I brought that up about the concert, was, it is nice to have it in the summer when Terry plans it, and, if it gets dark later and everything, trying to think where the sun would be, it would be nice to have some sort of coverage rather than being out completely in the open.
So within the budget is $745,000 in contingency. We'll never spend that.
Okay?
If we come close to spending that, then we should be fired. He should be fired. Him first. You want
But Dan, you.
But
as
having
a-
built 3 Deeds senior centers, I can tell you that it would be about 2% and not 5%. And 745 represents 5%. That's why some of these smaller items I'm not worried about. Is once the roof goes on and the windows are in, the amount of changes really shrinks. We'll know how much play we have with the actual construction contingency, and that's what it's for.
But would you agree or disagree that versus adding it on, that we would say, okay, now we wanna add this on,
Yeah.
give us a cost, Mr. Contractor, versus putting it in as a bid item with a deduct, which is the better way to do it? Because sometimes I feel, well, I've got you, and I got this project, and I know you want this item, and maybe I'm not giving you,
So we put language in the contract that we can hire another contractor to do work if they're.
if he
It
throws
works.
you an item that's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, for example, the IT work, we're gonna wire the building. We're not going to put the IT equipment in. We have a budget for IT, and all the endpoints will be put in by John O'Neill or whoever does IT for the town. That'll be a separate contract, and that contractor will have the right to work within the building. And we'll put that kind of language in the contract. So we will split things out of this so that we can get the best bang for the buck. That's the whole object here. If we add something to the contractor, will it cost more? Yeah, there'll be a small increase in cost. I mean, if it was $100, it'd probably be $125. No question about it. But we won't let them get 130.
Okay, thank you.
All right?
Cost per square footage on this so far where we're at, I was just doing some rough numbers, but. You're up.
The cost per square foot Hold on, let me pull that up. This, you're not gonna be able to read this, so, I mean, it's tough to read even when I give you the sheets.
If we're talking 17 million and then we got an 18,000 square foot building, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking 900.
Something a square foot. That's,
I'm just throwing that number on my head. I'm looking at it going, really, this is
That
not.
includes contingency.
That
Yeah.
includes everything,
That includes everything.
including, the schematic design. So if you go back to, the budget and you look at it, we estimated Dietz's fee, we haven't got a fee from Dietz, all right? I used the DCAM, suggested fee rate. Dietz might be more than that, it might be less than that, but it'll be really close, all right? The OPM fee is less than the standard fee, we work for next to nothing. It also includes full-time representation for the 14 months of construction. We'll go to the next slide. I plugged the contractor in at 14.8, and I put in 300,000 for FF&E, which is based on the size of the building, a reasonable number. 20,000 for miscellaneous, 50,000 for utility mitigation, 75,000 for, server and things that might be needed by IT. 40,000 for testing and commissioning, an additional 25,000 for geotechnical. Probably won't use that, probably use about 10, but I wanna have it in case we run into a pocket of bad stuff. And an additional 10,000 to do an as-built survey when we're done, to make sure that the town has great records when we're completed with the project. So, I added 390,000 to the contingency, and that's where we're at.
Okay.
All right?
Any
So
questions?
the total is 17,231,000 with the balance of the study.
Do we have any questions? State your name and your address.
George Allen, Stone Ridge Drive. And as you're going through this evaluation, what you want to leave in, what you want to take out, and so forth. What I would caution you is, remember, we're not building just for now. We're building for 20, 40 years in the future. So we have to keep that in mind in terms of material. But in addition to that, I think exterior space is very critical. If we've learned anything in this COVID, and Terry has done a great job doing a lot of outside activities. So I would caution you against reducing any of the potential outside areas or activities. I think that's very important for the seniors today and even going forward. Because it would be difficult to add anything in 10 years from now and say, well, why didn't we have X, Y, or Z, or why wasn't the patio bigger? So that would be my advice, my opinion. I don't know what the other seniors think, but that would be, I think, poor financial planning to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Linda Toad, 54 Fiorenzo Drive. I have one question on all of those planters. When it was first brought up, it didn't seem like we were going to be taking up all the green space with planters. There were a couple over in the front and then possibly a couple over in by the bocce court. And on that one, I'm seeing, well, what I could see was a lot more than just a total of 6 or 7 planters out there. So are you planning for the future? Or, I would think that future planters could be put quite easily on the concrete or on the grass, depending on what we have, somewhere down the future. So not right now to have them taken out.
That's a great question, and that's what design development is for. honing in on all those items. We wanted to capture a worst-case scenario on a lot of these items. For example, when we go to design development, each room will be looked at. Do we need a marker board? Do we need a chalkboard? Do we need an extra data outlet? Do we need an extra outlet over here? You know, those type of things get done during design development. We've got an estimate for it, and we've got design contingency for it, but as we move forward, planters may come out, that space may be redefined, but as we presented to the committee, that overall exterior space, we think we've covered it all. So, you're correct, it's like a gazillion planters. All sorts of shapes and sizes.
And also, Terry
Yes.
and the committee, were you planning on having that much concrete put on the outside? When you first were thinking of an outside patio, I didn't think it was gonna extend halfway on the green space from the back of the, I didn't see a patio going all the way behind the, dining hall or the dining area on that side of the house. I mean, not
Yes.
the house, on that side of the building. I was seeing it just coming out of the corner. Now it seems like,
No, actually it was there. And the reason for that, I think COVID had a lot to do with that. A lot of time was spent on trying to figure out the outside space, because we got to see how important outside was. So just as the discussion, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the discussion we just had, as in, it's better to have that flat area where everyone can walk on versus the grass. So actually, there was a bit of time. I know with this slide it looks bigger, but there was a lot of time put into figuring out that patio piece.
And to the other committee members' point, trying to add concrete or something after the fact to the existing never really kind of
No.
works.
Not only does it not work, the color's never the same,
Right,
the texture's never the same.
absolutely.
But I think she raises a good point, and I think for clarification too, Terry, we also talked about where, as it goes down to where the large function room is, so if
This area here,
right, so, we had exterior doors in the back
To walk
That-
right in.
to walk right out, and you would then be on the patio,
right.
So, again, thinking, if some big function we're going to dinner or whatever, and it was the summertime or whatever, a nice evening, that you could walk out, get air circulation or whatnot, so.
I think she raises a good point concerning the number of planters.
Yeah.
I like the fact that it's a very large concrete area, because this senior center is going to grow tremendously in attendance, and we want to make sure everybody has enough elbow room when they go outside, and they can congregate and have their own space. I'm just looking at those planters down by the bocce court and wondering, like, that would be a great flex space that would be left untouched, just plain concrete, to be utilized as needed. And looks like there's plenty of planters on the other side, but, to be determined later, but
Absolutely.
I think it was a good,
Design-
a flex space.
Design
That's a good
development.
word.
Yeah, I really want to dig in this in design development because
So a lot of this can change.
Yeah.
This is worst case scenario then.
I think it's best case
Or
scenario.
best case scenario.
Best
All right, we'll go there.
Alright.
No, I think there's a lot here to work with, and we spent a little bit of time in schematic design talking about these spaces. John Hammer has done a fantastic job capturing the vision that we were trying to discuss with him about a garden space and a patio and a porch onto that patio. And it doesn't really give itself justice in this two-dimensional representation. I can't wait to explore what this looks like with raised planters and vegetation and flowers and get that feeling of being in that place, because I think it's really exciting. And then we can figure out what the best fit is.
Do you have one more question?
Yes. I've noticed, and I think it's going to end up in your design contingency thing, but I was wondering if on the Main Street side of the building where you have the physical and that whole side of the building, are you planning on putting an emergency exit in one of those walls or in one of those rooms? So in case people, God forbid anything happens, people on that end of the building.
Right there.
Yeah, but you don't, with all the other rooms that you have there, you don't have anything going outside to the Main Street sidewalk because you're gonna clog up that exit with people coming out from all of those other ones. That's where they're going to siphon into. Where if you have one going out that way, the people in that big part of the building and would go out that exit and not have to worry about that narrow corridor being locked up. That's just my.
I'm sure there's a code requirement.
So I was just gonna say, we cannot design this building by law without having adequate exits for the design occupancy of the building. So if each room not only gets a design occupancy, that gets checked by the building inspector, the travelways, the length of travelways, and the number of exits have to also correspond to the amount of people that will be in the building. So there will be adequate exits in the building, and there'll be unobstructed exits, unlike the schools.
That was just me, it's like, I don't see one there, I wanna get out. I don't know about anybody else, but I wanna
Follow
get
the
out.
exit signs.
That's right.
There you go, just follow the exit signs.
Absolutely, we're working on that right now, actually, it's something that something Alan's been working on is that exact analysis of the building and sizing the corridors to be big enough, they're actually all oversized, because that was one of the directions of the committee, that we don't have any narrow corridors, and sizing the doors to make sure that everyone's exactly.
And it is a suppressed building too, which is, also helps with the number of exits. Suppressed meaning sprinkling.
Okay.
So, theoretically, if something occurred, it would be extinguished instantaneously.
That, for fire emergency.
Right.
Minus the,
Well, this is so this is
minus that. All right, so I'd like to kind of stick to the budget. I know there's
Yep.
gonna be a lot of design development that goes through.
So I put this together today. I haven't triple checked it, Jeff, so there could be an error in there, but it's pretty close.
No, I just wanted to confirm, so the gross number, 17,586, then the 355 is the amount that's associated with the work that's being done currently, that's contracted for currently, correct?
That's what hasn't been contracted. 3-4,
The 355,000 balance study, so is that the unexpended amount of?
that's the unexpended balance.
Right,
So
okay.
whatever's left over will come
Right.
off that.
So 17,231 is the amount right now that we're saying we would need, if we made no changes whatsoever, to raise and appropriate or borrow.
That's what I meant about worst case, yeah.
Okay.
So you.
I actually think it'll be a little bit less, but I'll go over that. There's some numbers that have to be tweaked. For example, the estimate's 14,880, and I also included in the actual budget the study fund. So there's some small adjustments that need to be done, but it's going to be around 17.
Is that what we'll have for our next meeting?
Yeah, it'll be around 17, and anything that you guys want to value engineer out or not. You may say, hey, this is what we designed, let's go for it.
Yeah, I have my opinion on things. Again, like you said, aluminum windows, those are premium, they stand the test of time. I'm not looking to cut short on anything that's going to.
Yeah.
And that's where we'd look towards you, George,
Right.
as the maintenance and,
That's a
yeah,
big
we're
part.
looking at the maintenance, but we're also looking at long-term, durability for the building.
And then I looked to Terry, you know, for programming, and you're right, with that, anything we've learned through the pandemic, the outdoor space, I mean, that's a big plus. I mean, can we raise money on pergola and stuff, so, yeah, and what are those going to be built out of? I mean, so, you know, here when we're building something, it's being built for the senior center, it's not just running to Home Depot and getting some
Right.
pressure treated lumber and bolting it together, you know, so.
As a matter of fact, speaking of that towards bocce, they just sponsored, you know, a bocce event. And, you know, the place that we went to, is considering that, the, you know, some coverage, on the, near the courts. And, so, good.
All right, Dan, is that, anything else on this?
That's it.
Any other questions on this before I move on to the next item?
I do have a question, I'm so sorry, as a procedure.
You can
As
ask
in-
100 questions.
So the numbers that you gave us tonight, and then, are kind of like raw numbers then, so then you
So
come
the-
back to us and look at it,
So
I'm
the
just trying to
construct,
understand.
the construction number's pretty close. Taking into consideration the current economic climate we're in, all right? The OPM number and the designer number are estimated current standards. I mean, they might move a little. The furniture number is based on a cost per square foot. So there are numbers that could shift a little bit here and there, but for an appropriation budget, they're fine. I guess is what I'm saying. This is not uncommon what we're doing.
This is obviously my first time, so I just wasn't sure if this was like the number that you would go to for a special town meeting, or if the numbers are still being worked out.
And I would suggest taking, if you want to read through this before our next meeting, so if you have any additional questions.
So we are blessed with the fact that we're not meeting with the finance committee till October.
October.
So it's not like we're in a rush here and this number is etched in stone. It's only going to go down.
Okay.
It's not going to go up.
Thank you.
And that will be based on what you tell us you want to do.
And just for clarification, that's not happening tonight. We're gonna sit with these numbers, look at these numbers,
Right.
and then we'll
Right.
value engineer
Right.
as a
Correct.
committee at a later date, right?
Well,
2 weeks.
the value engineering is a process we'll do together because you'll have a bunch of questions and then we can provide information back from PMNC, our cost estimator,
Sure.
to help guide the process. So if you say something like, well, what if we just built this building out of metal studs instead of wood studs? We could contact our cost estimator and say, okay, what does this look like? What's the delta between the two? Would we save money? Would it be an adder? And they can help us with that. So you don't need to do all the hard work yourselves. Ideas are what's
We need your ideas, we'll do the math.
Okay.
So to that
Thank you.
end, are steel studs cheaper than wood studs?
I shouldn't have said that because I don't.
Actually, the price has gone up on both.
The price has gone up on
Yeah.
both, and wood has come down a little, but it's fluctuating.
It's
The
flexible.
problem with the steel stud situation is that we have to add a steel frame. Where with the wood's load bearing. So for us to do a load bearing steel stud, the roof system would be entirely different. The truss system would be completely different.
Okay.
But you can go with a different gauge, you go with 16 gauge, up to
Yeah,
14 gauge.
I'm not worried about that part of it. I'm more worried about the roof part of it.
But that'll hold you. 14 gauge.
There's some big spans, some big spans in here.
So that's an example of something we didn't bring up in the cost estimating because it's very complicated and interconnected. So that's why the items that we illustrated tonight, they seem to be on the outside of the building, but that's also because they're disconnected from the other systems and they're easy to parse out as specific items.
And Mr. Chairman, Lee, are there other things that you think that you can bring to the committee in 2 weeks that we could discuss, other cost saving measures?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. The things that we pulled out tonight, We looked for the biggest sum totals in a specific category.
Sure.
Because we're looking for the $20 bills, the $50 bills, rather than the ones or the nickels and dimes. You need a lot of little pieces to get to $500,000 of savings if you're looking at it piece by piece. And we were looking to go from the draft to what we showed you tonight. We took out over $500,000 based on clarifications alone.
Yeah, the original price came in $500,000 higher.
So we've already done a couple of rounds.
That's what I did.
So, yes, we can come back. There's a bit of a diminishing rate of return when you dig into the smaller and smaller items. It gets more and more complicated, and some things you think, oh, this will definitely save money, but once you replace it with something else, it doesn't necessarily.
I'm sure there'll be a couple things that will strike you in the shower in the morning and say, ah.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, we'll continue working on this.
I will tell you that, when we talk value engineering, it really is devalue engineering. This, we could take a, a countertop and make the countertop, a 10-year countertop instead of
Dad would make it
25-year. Yeah, out of Formica. I mean, you laugh, but those are things that can be done that will defeat the purpose of what the finance representative has been asking us to do all along, which is to try to make a maintenance-free building, so we don't have to revisit the building. So we can go down that path if the initial ask is too great. And we can give you those options. I don't think you're gonna wanna do any of them when you see that the return is not as great as doing it right the first time. We just happen to have hit a really bad
it is what it is.
recession
Absolutely.
period. It's tough. The last 3 MSBA schools have come in way over their estimates that were done a year prior. So I mean, there's a lot of angst out there in every community. This isn't.
It's a construction environment right now.
It's the environment.
We're seeing it everywhere.
So,
But I think we did a really good job mitigating the increases on this project. This is not an over-designed building by any stretch of the imagination.
Mr. Chairman, all right, so I have 2 questions. The first was sort of what you were talking about, Dan. When we make these decisions, what we're keeping, what we may have decided to change or whatever, and we go to town meeting, and this building is voted, is approved to go to construction, what in your opinion would be the start time for construction and end of construction?
I envision that we're bidding this late June, early July.
23.
And starting construction right after Labor Day
Of 23,
of 23.
of 23, okay.
And what's
If
the
we have to
duration?
go ahead in November, we're immediately gonna sign a contract to start working on the design development and the construction documents.
Right,
And that's a lot of,
there's a lot of work
there's a
that
lot
goes,
of nitpick work there and not a lot of committee work.
correct.
We're not gonna be meeting every other week, we're gonna be meeting maybe monthly,
Mhm.
just to review documents, to make sure that we're capturing everything correctly. There'll be a couple of every other meetings during design development, and then we'll go straight to CDs, and CDs are the bid documents. This set's gonna be this thick, the book's gonna be this thick.
Correct.
There's a lot of work that we have to do as a team, while you guys get to relax a little bit.
So then you're saying, so by the time November comes, and I'm gonna be on the positive side, then probably be ready to go out to bid June of 2023. July?
Late June, early July is what I would
Okay.
envision.
All right,
I don't think Lee would disagree with that.
okay, and
And,
complete,
and the bidding will take about 6 weeks,
6 weeks,
and
right,
then it'll take us 2 to 3 weeks to
check the numbers.
check the references, make sure that we have everything in order, sign contracts, notices to proceed from the Board of Selectmen, those type of things. And then it'll be really close to Labor Day, and the contractors will say, yeah, we're not starting until after Labor Day, because that's what they do. They never start a project mid-August, they'll always defer to after the Labor Day.
Okay,
And they'll have plenty of time to get all their foundations in, before the cold, and they'll build right through the winter.
Okay.
What's the
Building-
duration of construction?
I'm thinking 12 to 14 months.
Okay.
With the site clearing that we have to do and the amount of site work that's drawn, I think 14 months is, well, it depends how you define construction period, but yeah, 14 months.
I would think that you'd be having your Christmas dinner in 24 in the new building.
So the completion would be December.
Close to Christmas, not in early December.
Or maybe Valentine's Day.
You can have
Well,
Christmas
you can
dinner
have your
anytime you
Valentine's dance.
And if we're late, you have a Christmas dinner in January.
2024.
That's okay.
As long as it's not Christmas in
Wow.
July.
A long time working on a project from the very beginning to the end.
It's gonna be longer when you do a school.
Oh, I know, but, you know, this didn't seem quite as complicated as this.
Gail Baptist Building Home, a question on the timeline of going out for bids. If it's voted in November and everything's okay, what's to keep it from going out for bids earlier, like April or May?
The amount of work that it will take to make a bid set that is rock solid so that we don't get change ordered to death and cost more money and have to go back to town meeting for more money. We're not gonna, our job is to protect your dollar. So, the extra couple of months and making sure the documents are correct are way more important than rushing it out the door.
I just wanted to know, because it just seemed like it's a long period.
Yeah.
The amount, when you see the documents when we're done, every hinge, every screw, every doorknob is detailed. Because it's a public bid. It's not like building a house where you give 3 pages to the contractor and you're talking it through. It doesn't work that way. If we don't have that, if we show 3 screws on the hinge and the hinge has 4 screws, they're gonna ask for a change order for the 4th screw.
Sure.
So that was my first question. The second question was in regard to the building itself. I thought we were gonna look into an all-brick building as well as part of the, wasn't that mentioned that we were gonna look into?
The estimator
pricing?
was gonna provide a price for an all-brick building.
Okay,
It was not in the estimate.
okay,
But
it
we will
was not.
try to have that for you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Right? I don't think you'll like the number.
No, I don't
It's not
think so
gonna be
either.
less.
I mean, I've seen some of the construction costs, that's why I was talking about the standing seam,
Right.
because I heard that's 4 times the amount of asphalt shingles, so,
And it only lasts 10 years longer.
yeah, so.
So when you go out to bid, is there a limited pool of companies that would be looking for this type of project? And are you familiar with most of them?
Yes.
Okay, good.
The amount of vendors that will be bidding the project are vendors that are certified by the Department of Capital Asset and Management, which is DCAM. There's a list of contractors that are approved. If their work is worth $1 million and their bonding capacity is only $800,000, they won't bid on it. So there's a capacity that we have to look at of each of the file subbidders and a capacity of the general contractor.
And we work together to review the
Yeah,
pre-qualified
we will be
bids.
doing pre-qualifications on this one.
And so, there's a number of checks and balances.
And we'll need 2 volunteers to do the pre-qualifications of all of the vendors when we get to that point. And that is not fun, and it has Paul Mullerani written all over it.
Yeah, we've done that for the high school and stuff, so.
I'm just kidding, Paul.
Russ is coming. Hang on.
Do you have a question?
I have a question. Audrey Reed. No, Diane. Anyways, I have a question. I hate the fact that every time you put a bid out, you have to take the lowest bid. And that's not always the best choice. Now, do you have anything to say about going around that?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. The laws have changed in the past 10 years about that. It is easier to disqualify a bad bidder than it was 10 years ago.
Oh, good.
It's still not easy, but it's easier. And I don't want to get your hopes up. If they are a responsible bidder, as defined by Massachusetts general laws, we will be awarding to the lowest bidder. And the term responsible is defined by a few cases that the Attorney General has done in the past 5 or 6 years. Did I
You
get
have to
that right,
have
Paul?
good
You got
reason.
that right.
I got it right?
It's
You have
based
to have
on-
good reason, because they can
Based on
contest that.
Yeah.
They can go to the AG's office and feel they've been discriminated against, which could actually hold the project up.
I mean, I've had bid protests before. We've won bid protests. We had one project that went all the way to the Supreme Judicial Court, which made case law that gave more power to the building committee to reject a bid based on erroneous information. But it also gave them the authority to ignore de minimis. Prior to that case, if you were missing a comma, you could get thrown out. And so I will say the Attorney General's office has a wonderful program. The bid unit run by Deborah Anderson is awesome. She's reasonable, and she's quick. And if we have a contractor that has fraudulently submitted something, we'll be able to get rid of the contractor. But if the contractor's a reasonable contractor, even though we don't like him, we'll work with them and get the building done to your satisfaction.
Thank you.
They're all pre-qualified though, so we'll have the opportunity to review before they even put in bids. So we will only be
Right.
soliciting bids from pre-qualified contractors.
Thank you.
Another question?
Linda Toth, 54 Fiorenza Drive, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If that is the case, that we put this out and we get a low bid, and it's lower than what the cost is that we wanna have with everything in it, wouldn't it be to our advantage to have everything put out there for bid and then see what we have to reduce instead of
So,
putting out a smaller
so
estimate?
we have a program for that, and it's called a bid alternate. And within the bid documents, we'll probably have 5 alternates. One of them will be a generator. One of them might be the 6th pickleball court. You know, so one of them could be whatever it is we decide. But we will have alternates so that we can capture those things within the bid.
Okay, but what I'm saying is instead of putting the alternates that you have reduced here for us, why don't we just put in everything that was originally in the
If the
design and bid,
gotta get it through
and then
town
have
meeting.
somebody bid on that?
Yeah.
If, well, number one, we have to get an appropriation from town meeting, we wanna have a reasonable number. And number two, if the bid comes in above the amount appropriated, they are not allowed by law to award the contract, and the bids are only good for 30 days. So we won't have an opportunity to get additional funding from the municipality. So we are stuck with what get appropriated with, and we'll make sure that we have an awardable project. We're 100% on getting that done. So, but what goes in and what goes out can be controlled by bid alternates. Should we get a lower bid, we can add things in, we call them add alternates. Add alternate number 1, add a generator, add alternate number 2. So when we award the bid, it would be the base bid plus alternate 1 plus alternate 2. Maybe we don't want to do alternate 3, 4, and 5, or maybe we do. It would be up to the committee based on the bids that we receive. And we'll go through all of that with the committee with bid tabs and show them what happens. Because sometimes it changes the result of the bid too, and may change who we get for a general contractor.
In those bid alternates, they have to be prioritized based upon your desired.
They have to be prioritized, you can't cherry pick, we have to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4.
Right.
And if we do more than 5, we'll get a terrible bid because it gets too complicated for the contractors.
But, George, I think if I understand what she's saying, the way I'm interpreting it is, why are we going to discuss this value engineering of picking and choosing and maybe taking some
Prior
things
to.
out when we have a price here that you've given us, okay, of the,
All in.
17,231,000, okay?
All in.
Right, so I guess and maybe I'm wrong, what you're saying, but do we go in and say, okay, after we've checked all these things, you know what? We really don't wanna touch that much. We like everything the way you planned, maybe a few things less in the plantings and everything, but we wanna leave everything and that number stays pretty much the same. We could still have alternates
Mhm.
put in, or add alternates, or deduct alternates, whatever, to help us maintain that goal. Now, I know that most bidders, most contractors, and I think Teresa asked the right question, these are people that have done these buildings in the past, and they're more familiar with the escalation of prices going up. So, you know, they know that we're playing with a number, all right? They must have some idea of, well, they're gonna know, first of all, what the town appropriated. They know what the town appropriated.
I don't, honestly, I used to think that made a difference. I don't think it does. I honestly believe the contractors add it up and they give their best number based on whether they need work or don't need work, and if they don't need work, they add a higher percentage, if they do need work, they add a lower percentage. I do think it's fair, open competitive bid. If I advertise this at 10 million and it came in at 12 million, if I advertised it at 12 million, it would come in at 12 million. I don't think it matters, what we put in those. I used to think that, exactly what you think, Diane, but after doing this for 25 years, I've learned that it really truly is just a math game where they add up all the costs and they put on their percentages. And you know, some will round up, some will round down, some will add, take $50 off to be a little bit under a bigger number. Things like that happen, but not a major change.
Because I've seen, even in public construction, when I worked, that you'd see some item come in and you know they were lowballing it on that item. But then there was another item that they made up for it on, you know.
But the good news here is, so there's two parts to the bid. The first part is the file subbidding. And the file subbidding gets published 2 weeks prior to the bid. And we'll know what file subbid costs are, we'll know where our target number is, we'll know where we are. And the vendors will all carry the lowest usually. Sometimes they don't. Occasionally you'll have a vendor that takes the same contractor that does plumbing and HVAC, even though the plumbing one, they were second. They can do that. They just have to pick from the list. But the low bidder generally has all the lowest file subbidders. We're gonna know what their costs are. Where the delta comes in is the site work, the concrete work, the framing. The non-file subbid trades will be truly based on how well they shop their own vendors and individually, 5 or 6 different general contractors individually doing that. I don't know if I just confused you or whether it helped.
No, I mean, I know the file subbidding and then the general.
It's a
comes in.
horrible system.
Yeah.
I wish I knew someone who worked at the Attorney General who could get rid of it.
Well, I can remember when they
Not in
first.
election year.
When they
It's
first implemented this law.
a tough system. I mean, Massachusetts is only one of 2 states that uses the file subbid system.
Right.
And it's a tough system because general contractors may get us a vendor they don't wanna work with. Even though they're allowed to not pick them, they know they can't be low bidder if they don't. So there's a lot of back and forth that will go on. We'll explain all of that as we get closer to bidding. There's so many different rules that we'll talk about.
Okay, so the next couple of meetings are gonna be us talking about some of these items.
We'll be busy.
Looking over this pricing and this here, coming back and deciding what's important.
Okay?
To move on, I know that with the DPW and they had the site, they were digging today, test pits, so.
Oh, you're talking about the other project.
What did we have over at, oh yes, sorry,
You're talking about the town hall.
what about our borings and stuff?
Are the borings here?
Yes.
The borings for the senior center showed gravelly, rocky material and a groundwater table that was a little up, not as low as we want. That's why we're putting in subsurface drainage as opposed to, open drainage. And that's
Water table.
that's an additional $500,000.
Water table was high in that area?
Water table was higher. The modeling, MOTTLING, is showing the water table seasonally is higher.
Did that surprise you?
To be honest, it did. Surprised me,
Yeah, surprised me too.
because it's kind of like this.
Yeah.
And considering the lake is not that far away, so that's your water table right there, right?
Mhm.
And then you got the Lovers Brook, so,
Just know Wilmington.
Well,
Yeah.
it's wet.
yeah,
It's wet.
ledge or.
You'd have 4 houses if you had the Wetlands
But we've
Protection
had
Act
the
right.
driest year we could possibly have.
Yeah, right.
And that's
Yeah,
why
but we
I'm
don't,
so
we don't look at
surprised.
water.
Even on dry land,
We're
it's
not
wet.
looking at water, we're looking
Yeah,
at
exactly.
oxidation. So there's evidence of water, not necessarily water. So they're looking at evidence of water, not necessarily water.
But we found both.
But you found both.
Have we gotten the traffic study back yet?
DD.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's something that, I don't know that we ever got a signed traffic study amendment. So I don't know that they started.
Yeah, we've never been officially approved.
It's a mess.
Oh, okay. So are we planning on engaging somebody to do that?
Oh, yeah, we have to do that for planning.
Okay,
So
so,
we'll do that in DD. It's in the budget.
okay.
If you look, you'll see there's a line item for it.
Because that comes under the next phase where you go
Right.
before the planning board.
You'll see it's in the budget, under the architect, 16,000 and change.
And that's going to study the traffic on Route 38, and is it going to study the traffic going on Glen Road on the opposite,
In Hardin.
in Harding,
We'll need to look at the way that the traffic study request for proposal is written. I think we might need to fine tune it for DD, because it might be so far back that it was talking about one site versus another during site selection.
Yeah.
And so we'll instead focus on
Just,
the impacts of this site, and they'll give us their professional opinion as how far out we need to go to gather enough data for them to do their study.
yeah. Okay,
they will look at more than 138. They'll look at
right, because
the
I
immediate,
think
they'll
Glen
look
Road
at
is
Glen
very
Road, they'll look at the
important,
Glen
yeah.
Road intersection with 38 too.
Right, I think that's really
And that'll be-
important. There'll be a lot of traffic going on to Glen Road.
I'd be willing to bet, based on how busy 38 is, that this is pretty insignificant, believe it or not, to the overall
And
picture.
I live off of Glen Road, so I can tell you that it's a huge cut through.
No, I
And
mean,
it's also, because it runs parallel to 38, people will jump off of 38 onto Glen Road. I can envision a lot more traffic on
Yeah.
Glen Road as a result of this senior center.
I've been in this spot before, so I believe you, I completely believe you. And this is something that you're not gonna love hearing. Traffic is relative. And, the traffic engineer, when they bring their report here, will give you some findings that might be surprising. They might be more or less than you might expect, because living in the community, you have a perception of the level of traffic over your experience of lifetime, or however long you've been at your house, or moving from one part of the community to the other, like, wow, there's so much traffic here. And what we'll get back is more empirical data, as far as trips per day, what kind of lanes would be recommended, or type of intersection would be recommended based on national traffic standards.
Right.
And it may feel a little like, oh, he didn't really take us seriously, or
No,
that kind
no.
of thing.
I
But
I
I'm
get
just
it.
giving you the preview that there's a big difference between how we feel when we live in a community and when an engineer says, here's the data.
Yeah.
And so that's the preview.
and the important thing is, on the traffic data too, is we don't expect the building committee to understand it. We expect the planning board to understand it, and the planning board does traffic studies with everything. So they're gonna know the jargon, they're gonna know, and they're gonna make their recommendations. So you know, whether we've designed it right or whether they want us to do something different. So, and that's all part of permitting.
So is there gonna be an exit to Glen Road?
No,
No.
she's talking about people cutting down Glen Road to get in.
Oh.
Will that
Just the
increase the
traffic
traffic on Glen Road?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
And that is something they'll study. They'll tell you there's 1,200 cars an hour and it's gonna go to 1,232.
What is the expected timeline with Mass DOT to get, there'll have to be a curb cut authorization there, correct?
There'll be a DOT curb cut authorization, and that takes usually 4 months to 6 months, depending on how much they ask for. And we won't really know that. We'll deal with that when we do the initial inquiry, and then we'll come back to it.
When I walked that piece of property this winter or earlier this late fall, there was a curb cut there.
Yeah, but even if we move it an inch, Diane, we have to go to DOT.
There's currently 2, because I think there's a drop off, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not
yeah.
where we want, it's never where you want it, so.
Okay,
We're gonna be moving a telephone pole too,
yeah,
for sight lines.
yeah.
Right.
It'll take longer than 4 months.
Okay.
Moving a
The
phone pole.
telephone pole it'll get finished about an hour before you guys move in. And we'll be out there patching the hole. That's usually what happens. Cause it's usually the cable and the phone company that are slow.
Right?
Question in the back.
Linda Tote, 54 Fiorenza Drive. This has to do with the meeting, but not with, the senior center. When you're discussing things between each other, can you sort of raise the volume a little bit so we in the back here can hear and understand what you're asking and what the answer is? Because with the fan or with whatever's going on, back here, I can't hear you, and I'm not deaf yet.
Okay,
So if you could just raise
Point
the
taken.
volume.
I have no problem raising my voice.
Well,
Right.
I don't know, I had a hard time hearing you give the explanation over there before.
But I'll be happy to raise my voice.
Good,
all right,
that's all
so,
I ask.
He speaks in lower tones about things that cost us money.
No, we wanted to hear that.
next item on the agenda. First of all, I wanna thank the committee members that did show up for the selectmen's meeting, and we went over the project. That was very good. And at that meeting also, they voted for the special town meeting to be November 19th, correct?
Yes.
November 19th, right,
Saturday. It's gonna be in the morning.
9 or 10?
9
o'clock.
9 a.m.
Yep,
Saturday?
Saturday. So
Yeah.
put that in your calendar.
We'd like you to
I'm
show
busy
up.
that day.
Yes, you are, all day. All right, are we gonna talk about any public outreach for this, or?
So, with regard to public outreach, I know that, Jeff's working with the department heads on the town hall school admin. Until we isolate the number, and we can then meet with Treasury to determine impacts, and have an additional idea what the cost, what's gonna be raised and appropriated and what's gonna be borrowed. I mean, it's hard to do what the cost of the taxpayer is until we have all of those numbers. So, I mean, we do know what it's gonna cost, it's gonna leak out tomorrow. And, we'll do whatever is necessary that you need us to do.
All right.
Yeah, I guess that this concept about coming up with
It's just someone's.
That's somebody.
the concept of coming up with a per average average cost per taxpayer. I had a conversation this morning with our finance director and our financial advisor about this, and as I've mentioned in the past, this is distinct and separate from when the high school was built. There was a debt override, debt exclusion. So, normally we stay within the limits of Proposition 2.5. The town has, as a practice, increased to the levy limit, which we're allowed to do under the law. And so any costs associated with budgets under the levy limit, that is part of the average increase in tax bills. But, so, I don't know, in this instance, coming up with an average cost per taxpayer.
You don't have to.
We don't have to, because essentially what's gonna happen is, if this project is 17 million or whatever that final number turns out to be, there's gonna be some amount of money that presumably will be used from reserves to offset that cost. And then to the extent that there's a balance, that would probably be borrowed. And so when that borrowing takes place, that'll increase our debt service, which is an operating cost, and it essentially just becomes part of the operating budget. So the overall budget increase is going to incorporate that. I mean, I'm probably not explaining it well enough for folks to understand, but there is a distinction between a debt exclusion or an override, and clearly in that instance there is a clear additional cost to the taxpayer above and beyond what you would normally pay. But if the project cost is within the levy limit, it's like buying a dump truck. When we buy a dump truck, it's within the levy, and there's really, the cost is the cost that people are gonna bear for their regular tax bill.
That's how you wanna display it is that's a political question.
I mean, can we, I guess we probably can.
I mean,
come up with a cost, but-
I think that we need to have the numbers ready for when someone says, if we don't vote this, does that mean we are not taxing to the levy limit?
Well, we're gonna still tax to the levy limit as far as we've done
So the answer would
historically.
be, if you don't do this, the funds we would be putting aside would be going into savings.
Or, going for some other purpose. So if we're not, if the project is not funded, then the reserves aren't drawn down to the extent that they would be, so they still remain there. And the borrowing that we will have to do would not happen, so the debt service, the annual cost of debt would not increase to the extent that it will if this project is approved, and other operating costs would presumably take up that capacity, that levy capacity.
So, Mr. Chairman, so when we did the high school, and that was a exclusion, a debt exclusion, and that was separate. So the question, when there was the formal meeting ahead of time, and the people said, okay, if you're gonna borrow X number of dollars here, and this project is gonna go, what does the average homeowner see as an increase to their tax bill? And at that time, I think it was like something like, well, if your average tax bill is $400,000, you may see an annual increase of $150 annually. I'm just throwing out those numbers.
Right.
Okay?
Decrease.
So, right, to add on. And, there were pros and cons there. So with this project, it's different.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry, what was that?
No, so with this project, we're not doing that. You're absorbing that in the operating budget of the town. That operating budget obviously is gonna increase, but it's not gonna go over the 2.5 levy limit. But people are gonna say, we're borrowing money, we're gonna have to make that payment. How is this gonna affect me as a homeowner?
Right.
Can you give like an average, a $500,000 valuation of a home?
I don't wanna get too far into this because we're the building committee,
Right,
obviously,
right,
just to
right.
remind everybody on
Okay,
it. FinCom, responsibility of the town manager, accounting, we're going to get into that, but I don't.
We are,
I don't
okay.
Well, we are, if we're gonna be including it in outreach, that's It's gonna need to be
Right.
explained better than Jeff just explained it, not that you didn't
Right,
explain it.
Right.
better. I understood it, Jeff,
Yeah,
but the average
Right.
taxpayer right now is going, what?
yeah, so that's why I don't wanna get too far into that, just to get it all.
We need to have a better way of explaining that
Right.
we can afford to do this without a debt exclusion. That's really what we're trying to say, that the town is being run well enough that we can do this within
Saving
our
our money,
means.
we're doing well.
And I think you need to be very careful about attaching a dollar value per household, because the message is not gonna be, but don't worry about that, your taxes are not going up. The message is gonna be, it's gonna cost me
Right,
another $350 a year or whatever. So your whole message is gonna be lost once you put that dollar out there. And even though I like to see the dollar, I think it's gonna really dilute the message. So I think what you just said, the combination of the two comments, is very good, you know,
but the question's gonna be, that question
The
will be
question's
asked at
gonna
town
come up,
meeting.
and it's a legitimate question.
Absolutely.
But people don't understand right now how this is going to be financed. And as we get closer, and as that becomes more solidified, then the message can get out that, no, we really can't give you, it's not gonna affect you like that. So, I, as much as I love numbers, I think we need to stay away from a per household number. It will be confusing.
Asked.
It will be asked. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, George Allen, Storage Drive, I know you wanna wrap it up. Just one point. I think the easiest way, speaking as an average taxpayer, the easiest way to explain it is whatever has to be borrowed, whatever the annual debt service is because of that, if it's $125,000 or if it's $250,000 a year, you have to say that's what the impact is gonna be, and then figure out on that basis. We can't say that, well, if we don't do this project, we're gonna spend this amount of money in other ways. No, we're not gonna spend it in other ways. This project is gonna increase because by the debt service, that's gonna increase your budget by the debt service. The only debt service you have now, I believe, is just for the high school.
We have other, but
Yeah.
Well,
it's
the ones for
largely,
the water, we can't
Right.
count them, because
Right.
those aren't on the tax, that's all water revenue.
right.
So on the tax side of it, it's just the high school. So the water projects, that's water receipts.
Right.
So how much is that debt service going up? And if we wanna get an idea, okay, if it's gone up $200,000, I mean, I think that's the way you gotta do it, and then how much does that affect the average tax bill? So if somebody's paying $7,000, is that gonna be another $70? Yeah, I don't know. But
I
that's, I
agree,
think, the way you have
we
to
don't wanna
explain.
stick a number to
Yeah.
per household.
Because also, and this will be
Again,
my
it's-
final
it's-
point on this, every time the tax bills come out, and if there's been a recent revaluation of your home, and you get a little bit of a bump, then people are going to attribute that to this
Right.
project.
And that's the challenge,
just not
and the assessor
clear.
has talked about that in the past, that, you know, one of the challenges that she faced when she first got here, because it was right after the high school project, was the authorization for the debt exclusion took place and people were feeling the effects. She was getting people coming in saying, gee, you know, I was told that it was gonna impact my bill by $346, and, you know, it turns out my bill went up $450, but, you know, there's multiple factors at play here. It's the valuation of the property. If the values went up disproportionately, that's gonna, aside from whatever's going on with the debt exclusion, that's gonna have an effect. So, and it's very hard to forecast, you know, what the value of homes is gonna be in the next 5 years or 3 years or.
But I think it's important, as we talk about outreach right now, I think that's gonna be absolutely important that we come up with a concise answer to the person who stands up and says,
Right.
how does this affect me? And we have to talk about valuations and assessments and things like that, as well as the levy. And your work's cut out for you, that's above my pay grade, but I think that's a huge consideration. It's something we have to keep our eye on as we approach town meeting.
you also need to take a look at the high school. So when you pass the high school, it was this ginormous number. It's now 10 years later. It's not that ginormous number anymore. It's a much smaller piece of the pie. And that's similar to what's gonna happen with these projects. They're gonna, when you get towards the end of the debt, and it drops off, it's not gonna seem like it was that big a deal as it does in the very beginning. And that's a tough thing to explain too. But we need to explain all of this in English, which is not easy to do when
Well,
you
in
deal with
layman's
municipal,
terms,
right,
yeah.
it's hard to
In
do.
layman's terms, right.
It's really hard.
And I've always found, not to belabor this, but you gotta relate it to the person out there like a mortgage payment.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
You know, they've gotta make that connection, you know? And this is a mortgage payment,
Right.
and so you know the first 5 years are the toughest when you buy that new house.
Right.
And then after that, you start seeing more going towards the principal and less going towards the interest. So,
And your income has gone up.
and your income is correct,
That's what we have to communicate, portray to the community.
right?
Getting out there, that's gonna be the responsibility of, like I said, the FinCom, the town manager, us, we've gotta get it out there.
Right. And we have to be consistent amongst
Right,
everybody
it's very
on
important.
this committee, so that when we're asked, when we're at the rulers, or we're in our neighborhood, so I don't want somebody saying to me, so my taxes aren't gonna go up then? Well, they are, but it's not because of this project. So when you get your tax bill, don't blame it on this. That's a tough one.
So regarding public outreach, which is what we're on, are we going to wait until we have the number for the other project and then have just the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom and us? That meeting, are we waiting?
I would suggest not doing outreach till we have decided what our number is.
Yeah.
And that's probably 2 weeks away.
Okay.
Maybe a little longer, 3 weeks, if you guys give us a list of items that is great. We'll add, we'll ask for an extra week to compile.
Yeah, I would suggest reviewing the information we have tonight,
Okay.
Was that loud enough?
to try to get it
Now-
back,
now when you-
All right.
now before-
try to get it
All
back
right,
to
I'm
me,
getting there, George, I'm
Try
getting
something.
there.
and then we'll get it over to Dan.
Okay,
And then we can
All right.
go through that. All right,
all right.
excellent.
So we are meeting, the next meeting then?
2 weeks.
Which is
Today's the
August
17th,
31st.
31st.
Yep, so the schedule is 31st, the 14th, the 28th.
Could it be remote?
Huh?
Could it be remote? Because it's numbers?
Can it be remote is a question from the administrator the architect, since it is just talking numbers. Is it possible we could do remote? That was his question.
Yeah.
I'll come.
I like the in-person, because there's a chance for everyone to meet.
and for our guests.
Yeah.
It's just, huh? I'm trying to,
Yeah, but maybe we
Limit
can
the-
have Lee, since it's only numbers,
Yeah.
you could be remote.
Yeah.
Talk to the IT department, maybe we'll
Yeah.
have our big TV set.
Maybe you'll throw your voice louder, maybe they'll hear you
Two
better.
speakers.
2 speakers.
Lee in stereo, what a thought.
It's gorgeous.
All right,
Okay, so the 31st.
anything else to discuss?
You around on the 31st?
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Jack Holland,
Seconded.
seconded by everybody.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
give it.
He's giving it to me.
Yeah. Chivalry is not
Thank you
dead.
so much.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Good meeting.
Thank you.